the ability of states and local governments to come together to draw from outside experts and those that have lived through this disaster, I think is critical to the overall recovery of the state.
Here in the Lumber River region, serve Bladen, Hoke, Richmond, Robeson, and Scotland counties. Back in 2016, we were impacted by Hurricane Matthew, and then approximately 2 years later, we were impacted by Hurricane Florence. Getting hit once by a once-in-a-thousand-year storm is one thing, but then getting hit a second time in less than 2 years, no one ever imagines, no one ever expects. We were approached by our sister COG, Triangle J, about an opportunity they had been presented with from ICMA, the International City Managers Association, and NACO, the National Association of Counties, about doing a roundtable to discuss the impacts and recovery from hurricanes within North Carolina.
Events like the Disaster Recovery Roundtable are really important to bring local impacted communities, both local governments and nonprofits, and their partner resource agencies together to learn and share information with each other so that everyone is able to receive the same information and share their challenges, their issues, and their strategies for recovery with each other.
Everybody uses the word resilience now. And resilience is a lot more than just bouncing back from a disaster. It involves a lot of things that we need to do as communities to think about how we return to something that we want to be, something we might aspire to be. The idea of returning to what we were before the storm may not be a good idea.
The state of North Carolina, I think, is with many other states in the United States and her territories. Knowledge is something that we always want to stay abreast of, and it seems that there are some local governments, counties, and other communities that just are more in the know. And we want to, through programs like this that we've done today, we want to collaboratively offer this sort of knowledge throughout the state, because we would like for all of our local governments and counties and private nonprofits to remain abreast as much as they can with the difficult regulations and policy that comes into play when a public assistance disaster is declared on a federal level.
You also have opportunities potentially for grant funding that are not with federal agencies or other sources of grant funding that aren't necessarily tied to disasters, but that could be a source of support for you for a particular project. So don't forget about, don't just assume, well, it's a USDA Rural Development Grant, that's not disaster recovery, I'm not going to buy. No, take a look at that. Explore EDA funding or EPA, and I encourage you to spend a few minutes after the program today at our resource fair talking with these different agencies that have taken time to send representatives here, because there might be some other opportunities for you outside of the main disaster funding track.
One of the biggest challenges in North Carolina is the fact that cities don't have as much flexibility as you'll see in other states. So that requires a lot more problem solving, a lot more understanding of how the state sees potential solutions working, and then figuring out how to work within that structure. So this type of event provides an opportunity to really to move the needle in that regard.
One of the challenges that we've seen local governments experience in our state is a lack of information and also a lack of staff capacity. And one of the challenges that we addressed today was providing information.
Hazard mitigation, HMGP, is run by the state and is not really disaster specific, even though that's where the funds do come from. That's where the funds are allocated. 406 mitigation is what happens directly related to a public assistance project. So you cannot have 406 mitigation unless you have a project written for, say, that building where I've mentioned that the HVAC unit is going to be raised.
All the speakers had good information. I think there was some good information that we can include in things like land use plan, strategic plan, and then obviously Mr. Jim Prosser, the former city manager in Iowa, he had some really good information about flood-proofing the city.
It's not what you think you don't know that makes you wrong, but what you think is true that just ain't so. And that's really important and more profound than you might first believe, because one of the things that we learned was, in terms of what worked and what didn't work, was fall into a couple different categories. First, we heard from a lot of people that said, you know, it took us a while to get the right plan. Just plan on putting together 3 or 4 plans before you get enough buy-in.
I thought this was a great event. It allowed all of the local governments here to hear how our various state and federal agencies are working together to help them. It also gave them some case studies where other entities have gone through this and have come out the other side.
It's really important for especially the rural communities that we serve to come together and learn about resources, especially for disaster recovery. One of the themes for today is that most of our communities don't have the capacity, staffing capacity, resources, financial resources to manage the recovery. And today we're learning about a lot of best practices from other places around the state and around the country, so we can bring those to bear where we may not have the capacity right away. We can at least have the good ideas and then work towards policy change and advocacy to get the capacity and resources that we need for a longer recovery.
Overall, I think it was a success, and I think people got some things that they could use immediately for their purposes. The hospitality was great too.
I go to one of these events, and I've been in communities that have had disasters more times than I want to count. I learned something, and it also helps me refresh my commitment to find additional solutions in the future.
We've been very lucky so far. We are fortunate that we were ahead of the game with certain technologies that FEMA brought to the table. We had a much more clear understanding of what was going to happen from the new delivery model from the public assistance perspective, and we have really enjoyed the largely collaborative relationships that we've had.
One thing I think it is important for us to think about is the value of encouraging pre-disaster recovery planning. I think that's one of the great challenges is that communities are often in the throes of disaster. They may not think about the value of a recovery plan. They're trying to figure out how to manage and operationalize a lot of the grants and programs. But the ability to come together and think through getting ready for the next disaster and develop a meaningful recovery plan is critical.